parents abandoned me at a gas station, tried to pass it off as a lesson. 20 years later, I bought their house and handed them a stack of papers. "You can't do this," Dad screamed. I just smiled as the bulldozer moved in. I never thought I'd share this story with anyone. Some wounds are too deep, too private to expose to the light. But yesterday, while scrolling through TikTok after a long day at work, I came across a video about harsh lessons parents teach their children. Something inside me erupted, not a sudden anger, but the ripening of a 20-year-old pain that had fermented perfectly, waiting for its moment to spill over. I'm 36 now, the owner of a successful construction company, with my own family and 2 amazing children whom I swear I'll never treat the way my parents treated me. But watching that video, I could still smell the pungent gasoline, feel the humid summer air, and hear my parents' laughter as they drove away, leaving me, a 16-year-old boy, alone at a gas station 200 miles from home. My parents, Gerald and Denise, weren't ordinary people. They proudly called themselves tough love practitioners. In our house, everything was turned into a life lesson or a character-building exercise. No mistake was too small to escape punishment, no failure was harmless. Every action had consequences, usually wildly disproportionate to my crime. I still vividly remember the morning Dad shook me awake at 3 a.m., dragging me out of bed in my pajamas, still half asleep. "You forgot to mow the lawn yesterday," he growled. "That was your responsibility. Now you'll do it right now." "But Dad," I cried, still groggy, "it's dark outside." "Then you should turn the lights on," he replied, his eyes cold and unsympathetic. "Nobody told you to forget your chores. This is the only way you'll learn your lesson." I mowed the lawn under the headlights of Dad's car while he stood there drinking coffee, watching me. The neighbors thought we were crazy, but to my parents, this was just the right way to raise a child. When I got a C+ in chemistry at 14, Mom locked me out of the house on a freezing February night in upstate New York. "Perhaps a night in the cold will help you focus more on your studies," she said coldly as she slammed the door in my face. That's the night I broke the garage window to get inside, curled up in an old blanket, shivering from cold and fear. The next morning, instead of being concerned about me, they were only angry about the broken window. They made me pay for repairs from the meager earnings from my job at the local McDonald's. Denise and Gerald weren't poor or uneducated. My father was a respected mechanical engineer in the area, and my mother was an elementary school teacher. From the outside, we looked like a normal middle-class family, living in a white colonial house with a wooden fence and a rose garden my mother was very proud of. She'd won the town's award 3 years in a row. But inside that house was a different reality altogether. Everything in our household had to go according to script, every rule had to be strictly followed. My parents conditioned their love, controlled every aspect of my life, from the friends I hung out with to the clothes I wore, to even what I was allowed to eat. My sister, Sabrina, 8 years younger than me, was the pampered baby of the family. She was exempt from most of the lessons I had to endure. "She's just a child," my parents justified, but I didn't get the same consideration when I was her age. I understood my parents loved Sabrina in a way they never loved me, and that hurt more than any punishment they imposed. That fateful day happened on a sweltering July morning. We were on our way back from visiting Sabrina's potential college, about 4 hours drive from home. I sat in the back seat of our old family Camry, half asleep, iPod in my ears to avoid listening to the endless chatter about how brilliant Sabrina was during the tour. Our car stopped at a desolate gas station in the middle of I-95, the kind of place you only stop at when absolutely necessary. Dad was filling the tank, Mom went to the bathroom, and I was lost in my own world with Green Day's Boulevard of Broken Dreams playing. "Scott." I looked up as Dad knocked on the car window. "Go get me a coffee." "No please, no, would you like something too?" Just a curt command. I pulled my earbuds out, dragged myself out of the car, took the $5 bill from Dad's hand, and walked into the convenience store, feeling the air conditioning's cool relief from the 95-degree heat outside. Inside, an old man with a scraggly beard sat behind the register, fanning himself with an old newspaper. The coffee machine was broken, and he had to brew a fresh pot. I stood there, watching the clock, knowing Dad would grumble about me taking too long. 5 minutes, 10 minutes passed. When I finally got the coffee, I stepped outside, squinting in the bright sunlight, only to discover an empty parking lot. The Camry was gone. At first, I thought they were just messing with me. Maybe they'd driven around the back of the building or to another pump. I walked around the gas station, looking for them, my steps getting quicker as anxiety rose. That's when I looked far enough to see the car speeding onto the highway, fading into the shimmering heat. Its red taillights grew smaller until they disappeared. I stood there, the coffee cup cooling in my hand, mouth hanging open in shock. They'd abandoned me. Actually abandoned me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My mother, let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider this a lesson in problem solving. And a smiley face emoji. A smug smiley face. I tried calling back, my hand shaking as I dialed. No answer. I called again, then again. Just voicemail. 20 minutes later, another text, don't bother calling. Your father says you need to figure this out on your own. See you when you get home. I stared down at my phone, feeling hot tears welling up. This gas station was over 200 miles from our home. I had no money, no transportation, just a phone with a dying battery, an empty wallet, and a cup of cold coffee. Standing there, under the scorching summer sky, with cars whizzing by on the highway, I felt something break inside me. Not fear or even anger. It was a feeling of letting go, a clear realization that I was done with them. Completely done. I don't remember what came first, the anger or the plan. Both flooded my mind as I stared at the long road stretching before me, knowing my parents expected me to find a way home, maybe hitchhike, something they'd always warned was extremely dangerous, or call friends, most of whom were hundreds of miles away, or maybe even walk along the highway in the blistering summer heat. I knew this wasn't their first lesson, and it certainly wouldn't be their last. But this time, I decided I would be the one teaching the lesson. I opened my wallet and counted my money, $152 saved from my summer job at the public pool. Not much, but perhaps enough for a bus ticket. I went back inside the store, where the old man was still fanning himself in the stuffy air. Where's the nearest bus station? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me with understanding eyes. About 2 miles down, he pointed. Follow the highway and turn right at the first traffic light. You okay, kid? Yes, I said, swallowing tears. Just need to make a call first. I didn't call my friends. I didn't call the neighbors. I called the one person I knew would help without judgment, Aunt Lola, my mother's sister. Aunt Lola was the only family member who ever treated me like a normal person, not a project or a problem to be fixed. My parents had cut ties with her years earlier, calling her a bad influence when she bought me a cell phone after they took mine away as punishment for coming home 5 minutes late. She picked up immediately. Scott? What's wrong, sweetheart? Aunt Lola, I whispered, my voice choking. They left me. A brief silence. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, hard, determined, where did they leave you? I told her everything, trying to stay calm but failing. When I finished, she asked just one thing. Can you read me the name of the gas station? I stepped outside, reading the name and location from the sign. I heard keyboard clicks as she looked it up. Listen, Scott, she said, her voice calm but resolute. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to call a taxi service to pick you up. They'll take you to the bus station. I'll buy the ticket online for you. You're going to come to my place in Philadelphia. I'll meet you at the station. But what about my parents? I began. Don't worry about them right now, she cut in. Just get to me. We'll figure out the rest later. Throughout the conversation, my phone kept buzzing with messages from my mother, each one more irritated than the last. Do you know what time it is? You should be on your way by now. Don't even think about calling Lola, you better walk home, young man. Your father is very disappointed. This attitude of yours needs to stop. With each message, my resolve grew stronger. I blocked their numbers, turned off my phone, and sat on a bench outside the gas station, waiting for the taxi. When the car arrived, the driver, a large man with a salt and pepper beard, opened the door for me. You Scott? The lady who called me said this was an emergency situation. I nodded, feeling safer as I got into the car. The bus ride took 6 hours, with me sitting by the window, watching the countryside roll by, feeling both empty and strangely relieved. I hadn't hastily escaped, I had a plan. Later, I heard from Sabrina that my parents had gone back to the gas station that evening, expecting to find me sitting there, having learned my lesson. When they didn't find me, they panicked, driving up and down the highway, calling hospitals and police stations. They even filed a missing person report. By then, I was sitting safely in Aunt Lola's warm kitchen, eating my first tuna sandwich in hours, telling her everything, not just about the gas station, but about everything. The nights locked outside, the 3 a.m. wake-ups, the constant criticism, the senseless cruel punishments. Aunt Lola sat listening, tears rolling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Scott, she said finally. I knew things weren't good, but I didn't know they were this bad. You couldn't have known, I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. They were always careful to make sure no one knew what was going on. When I finished my story, Aunt Lola placed her hand over mine. "You can stay here," she said. "For as long as you want. Forever if you like." My parents filed a missing person report, but it was quickly dismissed when Aunt Lola sent in an emancipation form for me. I don't know what she told the police, but they didn't send me back. 20 years. That's how long it's been since the day I left. I completed high school through a GED while living with Aunt Lola. Then a series of technical certifications, an apprenticeship with a local contractor, and finally, my own construction company, Scott's Renovations. I met Lisa, my wife, when she hired me to renovate her apartment. We have 2 wonderful children, Ellie and Jack. I vowed never to teach my kids the kind of lessons my parents taught me. Never to make them feel that my love was contingent on their performance. Never to make them fear me. Aunt Lola passed away last year. She was the best woman I've ever known, who saved me not just from that gas station but from a lifetime of misery. At her funeral, I promised her I would carry her spirit forward, her kindness, her forgiveness, her unconditional love. I had no contact with my parents for 20 years. Neither did Sabrina, now 28. She'd been fed stories about how I was a drug addict who ran away, and for years, she believed them. Only when she grew up and started asking questions did she realize what had really happened. I thought that chapter of my life was closed. I had lost them, but I had found myself. Then yesterday, my office phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I hadn't seen in 2 decades, my parents' house. I didn't pick up, but they had found me, and now I have 39 missed calls and counting. I never check my phone during meetings. That's a rule I established from day one of opening my company. Clients deserve my full attention. But when I stepped out of the conference room and saw my phone flooded with notifications, my stomach tightened. 39 missed calls. 39. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, but 3 calls were from Sabrina, whom I hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Lisa, my secretary, looked at me with concern. "Seems like someone really needs to talk to you, boss." My hand trembled slightly as I checked the voicemails. The first voice I heard was Sabrina's, and she was crying. "Scott, please pick up. Mom and Dad found you. They're losing it, just call me back, okay?" Not them, me. I sat down, listening through the other messages. Most were from my parents, alternating between guilt-tripping and demanding I respond. "Your mother is sick." My mother's voice, aged but with the same manipulative tone I remembered. "How dare you abandon your family?" My father, typical, blaming me for being abandoned. "We made a mistake, just a silly mistake." My mother again, as if leaving your son at a gas station hundreds of miles from home was just a harmless prank. The last voicemail was my father, slurring his words, probably drunk. "You think you're better than us with your fancy business? We made you who you are, you owe us." I sat in my truck for a long time, watching the phone continue to buzz with more calls. My hands had stopped shaking. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, the same feeling I'd had 20 years ago at that gas station. Not fear, not anger. Just absolute certainty. Finally, I texted Sabrina, "Meeting tomorrow. Denny's on Route 5, 7 a.m. Come alone or don't come." I arrived early, choosing a secluded corner, my back to the wall. Old habits, to always have a view of all entrances. I ordered a coffee, and waited. She showed up right on time, looking exactly like the rare photos I'd seen on social media, a younger version of our mother, but with kinder eyes. I could see her scanning the restaurant anxiously before spotting me. When our eyes met, there was a pause, a moment of recognition, then she walked toward me. Sabrina hadn't even sat down before blurting out, "They're losing the house." I sipped my coffee, waiting for her to continue. "Dad's been gambling," she said, tearing apart a napkin in her hands, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood. "Mom maxed out their cards. They found your company website and they want money." The waitress brought another coffee. I added cream and sugar, my hand steady. "Tell me everything from the beginning," I said. As it turned out, my parents had been tracking me through social media and my company website for months. My construction business was thriving, winning some major contracts in the past year. A local article about my success had posted my picture, and somehow, they'd found it. My father, according to Sabrina, had convinced himself that I owed them for my success. That without their lessons, I would never have developed the character to succeed. "They need $50,000 to avoid foreclosure," Sabrina said, eyes downcast. "I tried to stop them from contacting you. I swear I did. But Dad said you owe the family, that it's your responsibility. Why help them?" I asked after she finished. After everything they did? She started crying, telling me about Dad's drinking getting worse after I left, about Mom sinking into compulsive shopping, about how they blamed everyone except themselves. About how they made Sabrina believe I was a drug addict who ran away, only for her to realize the truth when she grew up. They're still our parents, she whispered, wiping tears. No, I said, my voice gentle but firm. They stopped being my parents at that gas station. The difference between you and me, Sabrina, is that you still hope they'll change. My phone buzzed. Mom calling again. I declined the call and pulled out my wallet. I'll get breakfast, I said, placing a $20 bill on the table. Block my number after this. Whatever they do next, don't call me. Sabrina, please, I mean it. You're my sister and I love you, but I'm not your solution. Let them fall. I was halfway to my truck when Sabrina ran after me, her face pale. They're coming to your office, she called out, her breath ragged. Tomorrow morning, Mom found the address. I tried to stop them, I swear. I just nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. Good, I said. Let them come. Back at the office, I found 27 new messages. According to Sabrina, my parents were telling the entire family that I was a heartless son who had abandoned them and now refused to help in their time of need. But there was one thing they didn't know. I'd spent the past 24 hours making calls of my own. It turns out my parents' mortgage was owned by a bank I'd been working with for years. When I learned my parents were facing foreclosure, an idea occurred to me, an idea so perfect it almost felt like fate. They were 3 months behind, foreclosure proceedings had begun. Honestly, it was a fairly simple deal. A few calls, a few signatures, and their debt belonged to my company. I called my lawyer, arranging a meeting for early the next morning. Make sure everything is by the book, I told him. I don't want any loopholes. That night, I slept poorly. Not from stress or anxiety, but from a strange sense of completion. 20 years ago, I had stepped off a bus with $152 and an iPod, with no plan beyond escape from toxicity. Now, I was about to close that circle in a way I never thought possible. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The meeting with my lawyer, Mr. Bergman, went smoothly. All the paperwork was ready. Are you sure you want to do this, Scott? He asked as we wrapped up. These are your parents. They used to be, I said. But as you've seen in the files, they stopped being parents 20 years ago. At exactly 10 a.m., the office doorbell rang. Lisa, my receptionist, called on the intercom. Scott, there's a couple here insisting on seeing you. They say they're your parents. I took a deep breath. Send them up. Through the glass walls of my office, I saw them for the first time in 20 years. Gerald and Denise Williams. My parents. They looked much older. Dad's trademark mustache was now white. Mom's dyed blonde hair couldn't hide the deep wrinkles around her eyes. They wore their Sunday best, the cheap dress Mom used to wear to church, and Dad's old brown suit that never quite fit right. I couldn't help but wonder what they had expected. The scared 16-year-old boy was now a 36-year-old man with a successful construction company, a husband, a father. Did they really think I would bow my head, apologize, and write a check? As they entered, my mother immediately burst into tears. Not gentle, quiet sobbing, but theatrical wailing, with gasps and streaming tears. A performance I knew all too well. My baby boy, she exclaimed, echoing throughout the office. Look at you, all grown up. She tried to hug me. I stepped back. Let's keep this meeting professional, I said, pointing to the 2 chairs opposite my desk. What do you want? My father puffed up like he always did before launching into a sermon. Now son, is that any way to talk to your mother after all these years? Cut the act, I interrupted, my eyes not leaving my mother. You didn't spend 20 years looking for me because you missed me. You found me now because you need something. What do you want? My mother cried even louder, pulling out a handkerchief to dab at her tears. How can you be so cruel? We made one little mistake. One mistake, I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. You abandoned your 16-year-old son at a gas station 200 miles from home as a joke. Then you drove away laughing, saying let's see how long it takes him to get home. That wasn't a mistake, it was the last straw after years of your sick games. We came back for you, Dad shouted, jumping to his feet. We drove back after an hour, but you were gone. Yes, I was, I said, my voice cold. And that was the best decision I ever made. I pulled out my phone, hitting the record button. Now state your purpose clearly. That's when the truth came out. Between Mom's sobs and Dad's bursts of anger, they explained the situation. They had taken out a second mortgage on the house for Dad's foolproof investment scheme. Now they were 6 months behind on payments, and the bank was foreclosing. "You've done so well for yourself," Mom sniffled, gesturing at my office. "Surely you can help your own parents." I let them speak their piece, then I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a stack of documents. "Funny you should mention the house," I said. "See, when I heard you were looking for me, I did some investigating, found out about the foreclosure, and so I bought your mortgage debt from the bank." Silence filled the room. Their faces shifted from confusion to shock, then to fear. "What? What does that mean?" Dad's voice had lost its bluster. "It means you have 30 days to vacate the property," I said, my voice even. "My company legally purchased it at auction last week. We're demolishing it for a new development project." My mother started wailing, her volume increasing to the point where my staff could surely hear outside. Dad's face turned purple. "You can't do this. That's our home," he hissed. Deep inside me, what remained of that 16-year-old boy, the child who had stood alone at a gas station with a cold cup of coffee, finally had a voice. "Like that gas station was my home?" I asked quietly. "At least I'm giving you 30 days. You gave me 30 seconds. Dad lunged across the desk toward me, his face contorted with rage. I stood my ground, not flinching. Immediately, the building security guards rushed in. I'd asked them to be on standby knowing my parents were coming. They dragged my parents out, my mother screaming that I was the devil, that I would rot in hell. Dad threatened lawsuits, property damage, and yelled my name. I just watched through the glass as they were escorted outside, still recording everything. My phone buzzed with a message from Sabrina. They just called me crying. "What did you do?" I texted back, "What they taught me to do. Look after yourself." For 20 years, I had built myself up from nothing. I had turned pain into strength, insecurity into determination. Now I had the chance to use everything I'd learned, everything I'd become, to destroy the place that had been my prison, the house that was never truly a home. Of course, my parents didn't give up easily. They started calling every relative, telling them their ungrateful son was throwing them out on the street. But they didn't expect me to have evidence of everything. I had kept an old Nokia phone that could record calls from when I was 16, with a recording of their prank as they drove away laughing, saying to see how long it would take me to get home. I had a folder full of birthday cards with cute messages like "maybe if you weren't such a disappointment." For 20 years, I'd kept evidence of every mental abuse, all neatly organized in a file folder. This morning, I mass emailed all of this documentation to the entire family. Every relative got to hear that recording, see those cards, read those messages. By noon, Sabrina had called me, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. They always told me you left because you were in trouble with drugs." "I know," I said. "They lied. They always lied." I was about to do something my parents hadn't anticipated. I had told Sabrina I would demolish the house, and that's exactly what I was going to do. The permits were ready, the plans approved. But I wanted them to witness it. I called them, invited them to watch. As predicted, they showed up in outrage, with Sabrina in tow, perhaps hoping she would convince me to change my mind. Instead, they got front row seats to watch their precious house being destroyed. My mother screamed about her award-winning rose garden. My father threatened to sue me. I stood there, drinking coffee, watching them melt down. 20 years of their abuse vanished in 2 hours. The look on their faces when the bulldozer went through my mother's garden? Priceless. But I wasn't done. That property was actually in a pretty good location. Instead of the luxury development my parents had feared, I was building affordable housing, 20 apartments with reasonable rent, prioritizing single parents and their children. The plans were approved, and construction would begin as soon as the demolition was complete. I named the project Annabelle Haven after my aunt, who had taken me in when I was 16. She passed away last year, but I knew she would have loved having her name on a project that helped people escape difficult situations. My parents tried to rally the neighbors against me, showing them childhood photos of our happy family. But those neighbors remembered how they used to hear me crying at night. One of them, Mrs. Henderson, even came up and hugged me, saying she always regretted not calling Child Protective Services. This morning, my parents had one final confrontation with me. They came to my office again, this time with humble, remorseful expressions. Dad actually cried, saying they were about to become homeless. Mom promised she would forgive me if I would just help them. I let them speak their piece, then handed them an application form to rent one of the new apartments, telling them they were free to apply like anyone else, but they would need references and a clean credit check. "But we're your parents," my mother screamed. Dad started in on the familiar speech about after all we did for you. I just smiled and said, yes, after all you did, this is exactly what you deserve. Tomorrow, the demolition crew starts at 7 a.m. My parents are still blowing up my phone, threatening lawsuits and promising revenge. Sabrina says they're staying at a cheap motel, planning to sue me. Good luck with that. Everything I've done is completely legal. I've planned to live stream the house demolition on Instagram for the whole family to see. It might sound cruel, but after 20 years, I don't feel guilty anymore. The strange thing is, for years, I dreamed about revenge, imagining all kinds of crazy scenarios. I spent countless sleepless nights thinking about what I would say if I saw them again. But in the end, just letting them face the consequences of their actions felt better than anything I could have planned. They threw away their son for a cruel joke, and now they have to watch everything they built being destroyed to help the people they looked down on. Tomorrow, I'll bring a folding chair and popcorn to watch their house collapse, not for sadistic pleasure but for closure, a chapter in my life finally ending. As I finish writing this, I got a call from Sabrina. Can I join you? She asked, her voice small. For what? I asked, surprised by the request. To see it end, she said. To start over. Of course, I said, feeling a genuine smile form on my lips for the first time since all this began. I'll bring extra popcorn. As I stand here, watching the bulldozers move onto the property, I recall all the lessons my parents tried to teach me. Every harsh punishment, every freezing night, every cruel word, all designed to build my character. Perhaps, in some twisted way, they succeeded. I learned resilience from suffering, compassion from the lack of it, strength from injury. I learned the value of a real family, what I found with Lisa and my children, what Aunt Lola showed me was possible. But the most important lesson, the one I will never teach my two young children, is that love should never come with conditions. It should never come with pain. It should never be used as a tool to control or punish. I've taught Ellie and Jack that their mistakes are part of learning, that their worth isn't dependent on their achievements, and that our home is always a safe place for them, no matter what happens. So as the bulldozers tear down my old house, I don't feel jubilant or even vengeful. I feel liberated. I feel like I'm finally free. Sabrina stands beside me, holding my hand as the final wall comes down. Tears roll down her cheeks, but she's smiling. Thank you, she whispers, for showing me there's another way. My parents refused to witness the end. They left after one final threat, swearing they'd be back with a team of lawyers, empty threats from people who had lost all power over me. As the dust settles, I hand the contractor the final blueprints for Annabelle Haven. 20 new homes will rise from the rubble, shelters for those who need them, just as I once did. Aunt Lola will never see the project completed, but I know she would be proud. She taught me the most important lesson of all, that sometimes, family is the people you choose, the ones who love you unconditionally. Long ago, my parents thought abandoning me at that gas station would teach me a lesson. They were right, just not the lesson they intended. I learned that sometimes, walking away is the only way forward. That you can build a new life from the ruins of your past. And that the best revenge, the only revenge worth pursuing, is living well. And that's exactly what I've done, and will continue to do. As Sabrina and I leave the property, walking away from the rubble of our past, I pick up my phone and delete all the unread messages from my parents. I no longer need to hear their words. I no longer need to worry about their approval, or their criticism, or their disappointment. I am free, finally and truly free. And that's the final lesson. Freedom sometimes comes from letting the past collapse into rubble, and building something entirely new from it.